great-grandfather founded the Hitchner Biscuit Company here in West Pittston. And he was from Salem County, New Jersey, way down deep south in New Jersey. And shortly after the Civil War, he and my great-grandmother Harriet were married. And not too long after that, they decided, excuse my back, I can't remember where I put it. They saw a poster, oh, here it is.
Building lots.
Building lots and so forth and so on. And Joe Cake, also from South Jersey, had seen that earlier and moved to this area and prospered here. So what Joe did was talk my great uncle Richard and Harriet into moving into this area. He had friends that had a lumbering operation out in Knoxon. And at the time, Knoxon was kind of the end of the world. It was like the great Pennsylvania frontier area, and the huge hemlock forest stretched out beyond Knoxon. And they were just starting to lumber there at Knoxon. And it really was a wild area. At the time, people would set out in the woods for a day of hunting or something like that and never be heard from again. And today, it's still famous for the rattlesnakes. So, in any event, the lumbering company had to open a country store in Knoxon to supply the people and the Lumberjacks. And also, they needed someone to make lunches for the Lumberjacks because the camp kitchen wasn't set up yet, and they would take the lunches out into the field, into the woods, to feed the Lumberjacks. And that's what Harriet and Richard ended up doing. And they had a general store. They soon built a large oven behind the store to bake bread because the Lumberjacks up to that time hadn't had any bread, just crackers. Of course, they were good at baking crackers too, the Hitchners. So that worked out very well and went on for quite a few years. And the Lumberjacks worked 6 days a week. Saturday nights, they were done working, and of course, Saturday nights, you know, they were ready to have a lot of fun. So Saturday nights, the Lumberjacks would come into town, and they'd
Into Knoxville. or
in Knoxon,
into-
not here, yeah, I should make it clear, yeah, that we're still in Knoxon. They would come into Knoxon, go into the general store, and drink and raise all sorts of hell. And of course, my grandparents, great-grandparents, they aided and abetted it. They would pass a jug of whiskey around, 5 cents a swallow, and this would go on to all the wee hours of the morning. Finally, the town would quiet by Sunday morning. Couldn't hear a pin drop, just the church bells ringing, and that was about it. Well, after a couple of years of this wild and woolly Knoxon, Pennsylvania frontier life, they decided they would move here to West Pittston. And my great-grandfather, Richard, started a bakery in Pittston, started baking crackers. And it wasn't long before he befriended the McMurtys, which, if you know of Bill Hasty's a famous town historian, they were his relatives. And the McMurtys were from Scotland. And they introduced the Lorna Doone to the Hitchners. And they started baking the Lorna Doone cookie, which was a nice butter cookie, something you really can't buy today. You have to bake it yourself if you want one. And that became very popular. So my great Uncle Joe from Salem County, New Jersey, he decided he would move up here to West Pittston and join the fun. And the two of them did, open a bakery here in town shortly after he moved here to West Pittston. And this is what the bakery looked like. And it's right across the street, right across Exeter Avenue here, where those newer homes are today. And they started baking in there and produced a tremendous amount of cookies and crackers, enough to supply the whole surrounding area. And then they stumbled across a recipe for cheese crackers. They called them tidbits. And they were little sausage-shaped cheese crackers, sharp cheese, and they were an immediate hit. People loved them. And before you know it, they just couldn't bake enough. And in a short period of time, they ended up opening 32 bakeries and warehouses, all in this area, out through Williamstown, Johnstown, down in Virginia, and of course up in Scranton in that area. to supply the whole area. And not long after that, F.W. Woolworth started hearing about the Hitchner Biscuit Company and the crackers. And at the time, he had just opened his first store in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And by the way, he was the one that made glass Christmas ornaments famous in his Lancaster, Pennsylvania store. He was the first one to start bringing them in from Germany. And before you knew it, all the stores in the area and all the other retailers were selling glass Christmas ornaments because he was so successful at it. But he wanted to open some stores here in the Wyoming Valley, in the coal mining regions, because it was prospering at the time. So a little bit before the turn of the century, he contracted the Hitchner brothers to start baking cookies for Woolworths. And for the rest of their time that the bakery operated, up to 1953, they baked cookies for Woolworths. They distributed their cookies and crackers into 43 states and Hawaii. And so they, by doing that, they were able to keep so many people here in West Pittston employed. They had up to 300 employees at one time, working days and nights. And getting back to Bill Hasty, he worked at the bakery himself when he was a young man before the Second World War. He said what his job was to go into the basement and bring up 10 100-pound sacks of sugar. Of course, they had an elevator. And dump them into a huge vat, and which was heated with steam heat. And his brother, Myron, his job was to stir the vat. And in no time at all, they had 1,000 pounds of marshmallow for the marshmallow cookies. Now, you can imagine how many marshmallow cookies they would have to make for the 1,000 pounds. And sometimes he had to do that twice a night. But he said he was young, he was a big man, he didn't mind. So, and it worked out good. And he, of course, like we said, he could eat all the cookies he wanted while he was working at the bakery. And this went on for years and years. When I was a child, I would visit the bakery, and I was allowed to eat whatever I wanted and take whatever I wanted. As the employees were allowed to take anything that was broken. And of course, we figured a lot of the employees broke whatever they liked, so that helped. And but the general public could also come to the bakery 5 days a week to the side door by the railroad. All they had to do was bring a big bag with them, 25 cents. They could fill the bag with broken cookies. And they had a whole wall of cookie bins with maybe 40 or 50 bins, different cookies you can have. And if they were broken too bad to sell for 25 cents, occasionally they would put barrels of broken cookies out front. And of course, this attracted the hobos and the tramps that would come through the area, especially during the Great Depression. But free broken cookies was better than starving to death. So that worked out good for the local hobos and the tramps. As a matter of fact, my grandfather sometimes would come home with 2 or 3 hobos for dinner. My grandmother had a big family. They had always plenty to eat. And he would always tell my Aunt Jane and my uncles, listen, these are nice people. They're just out of work. They're looking for employment. They're welcome to our house. And apparently West Pittston felt pretty much the same way. They would put them up overnight in the jailhouse, I guess so they could keep track of them and know where they were. But they would cram the old jailhouse on Spring Street there, which is where my grandfather lived. And they'd spend the night. And sometimes, if it was Thanksgiving or Christmas, neighbors would bring in Christmas or Thanksgiving dinners for them. So it was a different time. And I think people were a lot more gentle and kind to one another back in those days. So this went on for quite a few years. And I showed you the bakery of, I have a few other, also on Exeter Avenue, this is the Hitchner family out on their front porch, a house just a little ways toward the west on Exeter Avenue. And their relative Joe Cake, this is what was left of the Clear Spring coal mining operation here on Exeter Avenue too. And as we get into the 1950s, first I should mention 1940s, the Second World War, even though it was wartime, the Hitchner Biscuit Company kept churning out all sorts of biscuits and crackers and cakes. And one of the reasons was they were a Defense Department manufacturing company. They had more than 50% of their business devoted to the war effort. They made hardtack for K rations, and they did all sorts of things of that nature. And they did have problems from time to time finding supplies, but they could get all the sugar they wanted. No problem. The government figured out a way they could get all the sugar they wanted. It was rationed for most everybody else. But they had a hard time getting lard, which you really needed for crackers and cookies back in those days. They didn't use vegetable shortening like they do today. But turns out that a family that was friendly with the Hitchner family, one of the men of that family stopped in a bar to talk to my grandfather after he got out of work one day, and he said, "Listen, so I understand you're having trouble getting lard to bake your cookies and crackers." He said, "Oh yeah, so we're going to have to close the bakery. It's really bad." He said, "No, you don't have to do that." He said, "We can make a deal." He said, "You know, I've got a lot of stills up here in the mountain." He said, "And I can't get enough sugar." So my grandfather says, "Well, to make a long story short, they agreed." And my grandfather always said, "Well, I just really couldn't face the fact of putting everybody out of work. We would have had to close the bakery. I had no choice." So off they went, back up the back mountain with a truck, dropped off a big load of sugar, covered it with tarpaulin. Next morning they drove up the mountain. Here was all this lard that they agreed. This went on 2, 3, 4 times a week for the rest of the war. And fortunately, the speakeasies and the bars and the other places in saloons in the area could keep serving good liquor and social clubs and cheap liquor, and it kept over 200, 250 people working at the bakery during the whole Second World War. And getting back to the Depression, even during the Depression, the company kept a lot of people in West Pittston and the area working because the cookies were sold loose. By the piece, you could buy one cookie if you wanted. A couple cents would buy you 2 or 3 cookies. So during the Great Depression, if you had 2 or 3 cents, you could get a nice treat. People didn't like to buy bread during the Great Depression because it was expensive, so they would buy crackers. So the bakery kept humming along even through the Great Depression, right up into the Second World War, and right up into the 50s. And pretty soon they started having problems because all the stores and supermarkets and chains were going to package cookies. And now your grandmother, she worked in the bakery. I'm sure she worked on the 4th floor packing cookies. And there were dozens of ladies at long tables, conveyor belts coming down. And you had to have nimble fingers and get all these cookies packed, pick them out. They were all packed by hand, kind of like the Lucille Ball show when she was in the candy factory and she put the candy was going by, whoops, going by so fast. Kind of like that. But they just couldn't keep up with the big bakeries like the Biscuit and Kirbys, who had these great big machines to package the cookies. So they bought some land along the river, not too far from here by the railroad, by the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and they were going to build a new bakery there. And but what happened was they couldn't get a bank to loan them money. It was in the early 50s. Money was tight. The banks were very careful about who they loaned money to, and the money wasn't available. So my Uncle Jeremiah, who was running the bakery at the time, said, "Listen, this is it. We don't owe anybody any money. We don't have to borrow money. We're just going to close the bakery." And they did in 1953. That was the end of the baking in West Pittston by the Hitchner Biscuit Company. And but there's still a lot of good memories about it. And if there's any questions before I finish, I do have something for you. I have some recipes. So if you'd like to bake some of the cookies that they used to bake, you know, years ago they didn't use any artificial ingredients or anything like that, like they do today. When you got a cookie years ago, it was a good cookie and you just ate it, and that was it. Now, today, you open a package of cookies, you're okay until you read the ingredients. Anything, oh my God. Well, over the lips, across the gums, look out stomach, here it comes, and you go ahead and eat it anyway. But back here in this, there was no artificial ingredients, and just to give you an idea, here's what you're gonna need. 2 barrels of flour, 280 pounds of sugar, 4 gallons of molasses, and a pinch of salt. And that'll get you some peanut cookies. But anyway, if you like to convert it, I do have a conversion chart here somewhere. If you want to take some of these recipes with you and try converting it, you're more than welcome to it. Last time I was here, a fella said he would try that. And he said he was going to get back to me. I never heard another word from him, so I don't know what happened to him. I'm assuming they turned out all right. Either that or he has a house full of cookies he doesn't know what to do with. But now, I want you to notice some of the artifacts. These were packed with crackers, usually oyster crackers. These were given out to homes, to people. If you bought it full of cookies at the store, you'd have to keep the can. And these are what were in the general stores for years and years and years. Just open the lid, whoops, just open the lid, you get it open, and help yourself to the cookies, and they would go in a bag. The grocer would weigh them, you'd be on your way. And I do want you to notice too that there are some photographs here of West Pittston back in the day, back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And if you are at all interested in the book also has a lot to do with the way West Pittston was back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and kind of what life was like back in those days. It was a lot different. And, now, if you have any questions, please ask. Hi.
What was the source of the lard? I don't know that I've ever used lard in anything.
Well, if you've ever used Crisco, it's like lard, only it was made of vegetable. Now, lard was pork fat. And when they slaughtered the pigs, they had a lot of fat left over. And grocery stores, as they cut meat, the butchers would cut meat, they would cut off the excess fat. It didn't have to be pork, it could have been cattle, it could have been any kind of, but it was just fat that was rendered and boiled and cooked down to a paste, which was lard. And I know my grandmother always made pie crust with lard, and she made the best pie crust in the world. It's always flaky. Lard leaves whatever you make, cookies or crackers or pie crust, it's very flaky and tender. Much more so than Crisco or shortening that they sell today.
So the people from Knoxon then prepared the fat?
Well, no, the Knoxon, all they did in Knoxon was the lumber business, and my great-grandmother and grandfather were there to work in the country store for the lumber business. But when they moved back here, there was a big company in Pittston that rendered lard and made it the fat into lard, and Cudahy it was called. It was a very big operation. And so that was another reason my great-grandfather moved to Pittston and then over here, because access to lard was quite easy.
Oh.
Plus the railroads, there were 2 railroads running through town, plus others in Pittston. So distribution was easy too, from West Pittston. Matter of fact, Mary, West Pittston had quite a few manufacturing plants back in the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because of the railroads and
the mines.
And the mines, yeah, the mines and the workforce, the coal was available. So
maybe what you're getting at
Where did they get the lard?
were some of those stills hidden in pig farms in the hills somewhere.
Yeah, obviously
so.
the farmers were collecting
yeah,
the fat
I
and
think so.
the pork
I
fat.
think so. Yeah, that could very well be all interconnected there, you know. Plus, the family that was able to supply the lard to the Hitchners had a lot of local connections and a lot of leverage that other people didn't have. So that helped. They could pretty much get whatever they wanted. But sugar was a big problem. But yeah, lard.
That's almost like a secret of the past, probably.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, but it's something that benefited everybody in the area, just about. And the social clubs and speakeasies and the people who liked cookies and crackers. So,
And whenever you have a good thing, you end up with imitators. Were there any people who were trying to put out the same kind of product that might
Yeah.
threaten being competition?
Yes, there were. I skipped over it. But what happened was, there were several offers by big bakeries to buy the Hitchner Biscuit Company, especially after they came out with a cheese cracker. It was so popular. They were selling cheese crackers in ballparks. You went to see a Phillies game, instead of Cracker Jacks, they were selling these tidbit cheese crackers. It was really a big hit. So Nabisco finally made them an offer that they could refuse in the late 1800s, about 1899. And the building, which is across the street, this building, was where they were still baking here in West Pittston. Nabisco took over. They bought Hitchner's out lock, stock, and barrel, mainly to get the recipes and the names, the tidbits, the Lorna Doones, and some of the other crackers and cookies they made. And they took over the bakery here on Exeter Avenue, and they ran it for almost a year, and it caught fire. And it completely burned out. So Nabisco said, the hell with it. They just left. Well, the Hitchners still owned the building, and they owned the land. So the Hitchners said, okay. They rebuilt the bakery, put new machinery in, and started baking again. And instead of baking Lorna Doones, they baked Scotch lassies. And instead of baking tidbits, they baked sausage cheese and so forth and so on. And they just continued on as if nothing happened. And the nice thing about Nabisco was, too, also, that when they did take over here in town, they didn't fire anybody that was in the bakery. They kept everybody on. Everybody had a job until the bakery burned. And then, of course, they couldn't wait for the Hitchner's ability to then put everybody back to work. So that also worked out good for the community, because Nabisco probably would have closed it down after a couple of years and put all those people out of work. So there were quite a few people interested in buying it, but the ones with the biggest money got it, like Nabisco, and just mainly for the Lorna Doones and the tidbits. So next time you eat a Lorna Doone cookie, think of Hitchner Biscuit Company in the bakery, and they're Lorna Doones, but believe me, they're nothing like they used to have. Lorna Doones today just don't have that same texture and flavor. Unless you buy it at like a little local bakery, I think, and then you're going to have it. Are there any other questions, Mary?
The new bakery, that was what, 1910, what was that date on that?
Oh, when they built the bakery.
When they built the one up the
Yeah,
street
they
by the
built
tracks?
bakery up here by the tracks. This one, it opened, you're right, 1910. And as you can see, they built it by a siding. And see the ladies waving out the might have been your grandmother. Your
My mother-in-law.
mother-in-law. Yeah. And that worked day and night. And this building is the one that Bill Hasty worked, had to go down to the basement, bring the sugar all the way up to the second floor, and or third floor. Third floor was where they did all the icing and cookie manufacturing. The conveyor belts clanked and ran, and cookies ran down there, and chocolate sprayed on top of them. Somebody poked a cherry on the top, and out they went. And like you mentioned, it's still there today, and it's, as Mary said, it's been very, very nicely restored. As a matter of fact, I have a photograph right here somewhere. They saved the ovens in the building. There are two ovens toward the back of the building, and this is what one of them looks like today, two-story oven. And the other oven has been converted into a lounge area for the residents, TV lounge rest area. And I think the building's full, right, Mary? I don't think there's, I think there's a
I'm
waiting
not
line
sure.
to get into.
Okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case. I haven't heard about a lot of
Yeah.
vacancies.
And, and one more thing. The sale of the books, every book sold here in West Pittston, $5 does go to the Historical Society, and which is nice. They can use all the money they can get, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's about all I have to say, unless you have some more questions.
What about the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi.
The name Cresco, how does that tie in with Hitchner?
Well, when they bought the bakery, or got the bakery back from National Biscuit Company, they realized they needed a brand name. And they started a contest and advertised it in the newspapers, all the local newspapers. Whoever could come up with a name for the company would win a $50 prize. And I believe it was a lawyer here in town, I'm not sure of his name, but he came up with the name Creso, cream soda crackers, it stands for. And that's how that brand name came about, the Creso name. Because after Nabisco took it over, they figured they had to have a better name than Hitchner Biscuit Company. They needed something short to put on the packages and the containers and so forth. But yeah, that's.
That was my question too.
Okay. Yeah, and of course, $50 is a lot of money those days. Still is, depending how you spend it. But any other questions?
Is that a real advertisement for the auction, or is that a reproduction?
Oh no, it's a real advertisement for the auction. Yeah, yeah. An early piece. Apparently, you would see them back in the '60s, right after the Civil War, posted all over South Jersey. For some reason, they wanted a lot of people in South Jersey to move here, and it didn't take too much urging, because all those people in South Jersey did then was farm, and it wasn't that glamorous of a life. And here in the coal mining district in Wyoming Valley, there was money to be made. So.
Can I interject? Yeah,
Yeah.
that was from, for the town of Luzerne. I don't want to step in front of the video here. Which was, the town of Luzerne was a section of West Pittston from Delaware Avenue south to the borough line. And it was all owned by the West Pittston Coal Company. E.C. Knight owned the coal company, and he was from Philadelphia, which I think is why a lot of the posters might appeared in the Philadelphia metro area.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were mining the land and decided that, gee, we could get some extra money out of this if we turned the surface into building lots. So that's how they were trying to build a competing town. And some of the lots sold, but then when West Pittston Incorporated, what's the date on that, Boyd? 1850?
1856.
Right, and then of course West Pittston Incorporated in 1857. So that portion of land was also included in the newly incorporated borough.
And I think somewhere on here, Mary, doesn't it tell you how much they want per lot?
It was very inexpensive
Yeah,
because they were
yeah.
really mainly concerned with the coal, the mining rights.
Oh, terms of sale. $5 must be paid when each lot is struck off, 1/5 of the purchase money, and so forth and so on. And I'm not sure where it says how, I think it was $100.
Right.
I don't think there are many lots left, but you know, you have any more questions?
Well, I have one. Are you familiar with the connection between Woolworth and Kirby? Because in Wilkes-Barre, I thought there was like the first 5 and 10 cent store in
Yeah.
Wilkes-Barre.
Kirby's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kirbys, yeah, and Woolworth started infringing upon Kirby's, although he and Kirby were good friends, from what I understand. And at one time, shortly after Hitchner started baking for Woolworth, he bought Kirby's out. And for some reason, he kept some of the stores that he bought from Kirby's and sold the rest back to Kirbys. And they continued on as Kirbys, and he continued on as Woolworths. And even though they were competitors, they were apparently very good friends, and worked together, obtaining different lots and different locations and places to build stores in this area. So that's why Kirbys was still so big in this area. They worked with one another.
And Kirbys lived in West Pittston as well.
Oh, did they?
Oh, really?
Mm.
And also, one of their homes is on the Wilkes campus, I believe.
Right, right. I mean, there was a number of them, but there were Kirbys on Susquehanna Avenue.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And Kirbys, boy, all the other department stores are just about, it's old history for like a lot of department stores.
I
And Woolworths
understand
and
that
Kirbys.
Woolworths still is pretty active in Europe,
Oh, really, is it?
and
Yeah,
from folks tell me they're relatively what they looked like here in the 50s, early 60s.
I gotcha, that's
Yeah.
My
interesting.
grandmother used to work for Woolworths.
Okay,
Well,
Hmm.
the Woolworths in Wilkes-Barre was still open.
not
in
that
the
long ago.
70s, I
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Mm-hmm.
Lock Haven had one in the 70s.
Yep.
Up until maybe 80, 82.
Okay.
And Barnes and Noble,
Right,
you
took
know,
over
has
the
retained
building.
some of the look of Woolworths in Wilkes-Barre.
Oh, that's where it was, with Barnes and Noble.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
interesting.
you could see the flavor of the Woolworths
Yeah.
store in that Barnes and Noble. And I think there might still be some kind of a marker about it being the first Kirbys store.
Oh, interesting,
I
yeah.
worked in Kirby Health Center for a long time,
Oh, yeah?
so I'm familiar
Mhm.
with, yeah, somewhat familiar with a lot of the Kirby history, or some of the
Mm.
Kirby history.
Yeah, and I'm sure Kirby sold cookies loose too, just like Woolworths did at one time. And I can remember as a child going into a Woolworths and my parents pointing out, oh, these are all Hitchner cookies. And I said, oh, well, let's get some. Nah, when you go up to West Pittston for the summer, you get all you want for free. We never did buy any Hitchner cookies out of West Pittston. It didn't help support the bakery. But that's how it went. Any other questions? And please feel free to come up and look at all the photographs. If you have any questions, Mary could answer them, or I might be able to. And it's really nice seeing you, and thank you for coming out.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Oh, and cookies. Cookies
Yeah.
and water. Help yourself.